The United States Department of Agriculture says that the average bushels per acre across the United States will be 167.4 BPA this year. This in the August crop production report. That's a well below, or some deviation, I suppose, below what the trade was expecting today.
It really was. I think depending on which survey you looked at, the market was expecting something 170 to 171. So you'd have to say that this number is about 3 bushels an acre less than expected. And when you put that on a production basis, that's about 250 million bushels difference in crop size compared to what the market was thinking a few minutes before the report was released.
Market does not particularly believe the report. Their expectations quite likely now are that a big crop will get bigger. Is that the case?
Tongue in cheek, you would say a big crop gets bigger unless it doesn't. I mean, the history is a little bit checkered on that, and it's a little bit hard to forecast that because you can't really forecast all the weather variables that you need to forecast in order to be confident in that. In most years, or in some years, a big crop does get bigger because you have pretty favorable weather in August and into early September, and that favors continued development of a big crop. In other years, that doesn't happen, and the big crop doesn't necessarily get bigger. So clearly the market is expecting that, particularly now that the initial forecast was below the average trade guess. They are even more confident, I think, that the crop estimate will get bigger.
You and Scott Irwin earlier in the year wrote a piece about the weather and what it might mean to the marketplace, that it looked awfully good, but June was not quite as some had expected, and July's been pretty dry.
That's right. We looked specifically at previous years when the U.S. average yield was well above trend. We picked out 6 years when that had happened since 1960 and tried to chronicle what kind of weather we had during the growing season that led to those kind of yields. And what you found is that the summer was generally cooler than average, with rainfall near average amounts in all 3 months, June, July, and August. And then we noted that this year differed because June was extremely wet, particularly in the western Corn Belt. And then subsequent to writing that piece, we also found out that July was drier than normal. And the one characteristic that has been consistent with previous big crops has been a cool summer. But the rainfall pattern certainly has deviated, and anybody that's using a crop weather model to try to forecast yields, I think, would not have been forecasting the extremely high numbers that some were expecting.
Given that, as you look forward, it will be about not only supply, but demand for this crop. What are your expectations?
I look for corn consumption to continue to increase a bit during the year ahead. In the August WASDE report, the USDA did raise their forecast from the July number, but still are a bit below what we consumed in 2014, the 2013-14 marketing year. I would be a little more optimistic, thinking that with the good profit margins we're seeing in all the sectors that use corn, that these low prices would begin to generate a faster rate of consumption. So basically in each category, ethanol, exports, and feed use, I would be a bit more optimistic than USDA forecasts that we saw today. And that means that probably we're going to keep year-ending stocks well below 2 billion bushels, maybe even below the 1.8 forecast in today's WASDE report. So it'll be important how that unfolds, and certainly the market will monitor that closely, looking at all the indicators and then the real-time information about how fast we are using the crop. But I think there's reason to be pretty optimistic at this point.
Turn your attention now to soybeans. USDA is projecting, turn your attention, Darrell, now to the soybean crop. USDA says this on a bushels per acre average will be the largest crop the United States has ever raised.
It really will be. 45.4 bushels is the August forecast. That would exceed the 2009 record by 1.4 bushels. And I think that's pretty consistent with market expectations, pretty consistent with the weather pattern we've had this year, and pretty consistent with current crop condition ratings. And as a result, I don't think the forecast provided a lot of surprise to the soybean market. We're on line for a very large crop this year. probably the biggest uncertainty moving forward on the supply side will be acreage of soybeans. We're still working primarily with the results of the June survey of planted and expected harvested acreage. And there's some speculation about whether all of those intended acres got planted or not. And on August 15th, we'll begin to see the monthly Farm Service Agency reports about prevented acreage. And it will be interesting to see the magnitude of those as they unfold August, September, October, as they get information from producers, whether we did see more than expected prevented acres on beans. But right now, it certainly looks like a very large soybean crop unfolding this year.
The trade is anticipating the August 15th release of those FSA numbers. They have been out for many years in the public now, but the numbers are preliminary and they build over time until USDA actually puts them into place, normally in the October crop production report. How much can we divine from the first release of those numbers?
You know, in my opinion, not a lot, because FSA is limited to the farmer reports that they have received and processed to date. And by the August 15th report, that is a varying percentage of all the reporting farmers, but it tends to be a pretty small percentage. And what we've seen is that both the prevented acreage numbers and the planted acreage numbers that farmers certify tend to get bigger as you go from August forward, and the magnitude of that change has not been consistent from year to year. So I don't think we can read a lot into it unless it's, for example, an unusually large or small number that comes out in August, and you would say, even though we expect this to change, the starting point is much different than we might have expected.
And finally, at this point during the marketing year, and I think this is correct, you have been, at least until this point, remaining advocate of sales of new crop soybeans, but that corn might well be stored, if you haven't priced it at this point, for higher prices in the spring. Is that still the case?
In my opinion, I think that is the correct way to go. I think soybeans are still a bit overpriced. The ratio relative to corn is still over 3, which is historically high. I think there's room for spot soybean prices to come down. Similarly, I think the market got way too bearish on corn with the big production estimates. I think they've not yet come around to seeing the big increase in consumption that we might have. And I think the market is still undervalued on corn. And until that changes, I would still want to be an owner of anything that hasn't been previously priced.
Darrell, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Darrell Good, Ag Economist at the University of Illinois.